The Case of a Secret Cipher. Chapter 1, The Unwelcome Letter. The winter wind pressed against the windows of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency Chicago office, rattling the panes like impatient fingers drumming for attention. Inside, Allan Pinkerton sat behind his oak desk, the lamplight throwing long shadows across the polished surface. His day had been full of routine matters: insurance fraud investigations, missing freight claims, and a report on a dishonest bank clerk in Joliet. Nothing remarkable, until his clerk, William, entered carrying an envelope that seemed to weigh heavier than its paper form should allow. "It came by special courier, sir," William said, setting the letter before him. The fellow insisted it was urgent. Pinkerton eyed the object. The envelope was thick, its flap sealed with a blob of black wax bearing no crest or mark. Odd enough, but stranger still was the faint smell that clung to it, a blend of stale tobacco and coal soot. He slit it open with the small knife he kept for such purposes, drawing out a single sheet. The handwriting struck him first. The letters were jagged, written with haste or trembling. The ink had blotted in places, and the strokes veered between heavy and faint as though the writer feared his time was short. The message was brief but startling. If the Republic is to endure, the cipher must not fall into the wrong hands. Trust no one. Meet me at the old Union Depot before midnight, alone. Pinkerton read it twice, his heavy brows knitting. He was no stranger to anonymous summons. More often than not, such letters proved to be lures set by criminals who thought themselves clever enough to ensnare him. Yet the phrasing struck a chord. The Republic is to endure. That was no petty thief's concern. It hinted at matters of national weight, politics, espionage, perhaps even sedition. He leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. His mind flashed to the years of the war, when his operatives intercepted coded messages hidden in letters, newspapers, even quilts sewn with deliberate stitches. The Confederacy had lived and died by its ciphers. He had seen how a single key, once broken, could alter the fate of armies. If this message spoke truth, he might now be on the threshold of another such affair. The clock on the wall ticked toward evening. William looked at him expectantly. "Shall I send men to accompany you, sir?" Pinkerton shook his head. "No." The letter was explicit. "I'll go alone. But you'll remain here and keep watch. If I'm not back by dawn, telegraph Superintendent Kennedy in New York. Tell him I was summoned regarding a cipher." William's face paled, but he nodded. By the time the lamps were being lit along the streets of Chicago, Pinkerton had donned his heavy coat and slipped his revolver into its holster beneath his arm. The night was damp, fog curling along the alleys as he made his way toward Union Depot. The building loomed ahead, its arched roof half obscured by the smoke of departing trains. The air reeked of coal and iron, mingling with the shouts of porters and the cries of newsboys hawking late editions. Inside, the station was alive with movement, passengers in wool coats dragging trunks, soldiers home from duty clapping comrades on the back, children chasing one another until their mothers caught them by the sleeve. Pinkerton scanned the crowd with a practiced eye. If danger waited, it would not declare itself openly. It was near midnight when he spotted him, a gaunt man in a dark frock coat, standing near the western platform with a leather satchel clutched tight to his chest. His eyes darted nervously, his shoulders hunched as though he bore a crushing weight. Pinkerton approached cautiously. "Sir," he began, but the man swayed. His lips moved soundlessly, then he staggered forward. In the lamplight, Pinkerton saw the spreading stain of blood across the man's vest. A knife wound, deep and fresh. The stranger gasped, his breath rattling. With desperate strength, he thrust the satchel toward Pinkerton. "Keep it safe," his voice broke. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the soot-darkened planks of the platform. Pinkerton knelt swiftly, but the man's pulse had already stilled. The crowd around them murmured in alarm. Someone cried out for a doctor. Others craned their necks, eager for spectacle. Pinkerton lifted his head and scanned the shadows beyond the lamplight. He caught a glimpse of movement, a figure retreating swiftly into the fog, a bowler hat visible for a heartbeat before it vanished. Pinkerton's instincts urged pursuit, but the satchel in his hands reminded him of the dying man's last plea. The killer might be gone, but the object was his charge now. He rose, his expression stern enough to silence the gathering onlookers. "Stand back," he commanded. "This is agency business." Few dared argue with the tone that had quelled riots and outwitted desperados. Without further explanation, Pinkerton carried the satchel away from the station, his long stride cutting through the misty streets until he reached the safety of his office. There, with the door locked and the curtains drawn, he set the satchel upon his desk. The leather was scuffed, the clasp worn from much use. Inside lay a single item, a calfskin-bound volume, slim but weighty in its suggestion. Pinkerton opened it and felt a thrill of recognition. The pages were filled with columns of symbols, numbers, and strange markings. Some resembled Greek letters, others appeared as though taken from almanacs or railway timetables, twisted beyond recognition. The repetition of certain signs suggested a cipher, complex, perhaps ingenious. Across the first page, scrawled hastily in English, was a title, "The Cipher of the Republic." Pinkerton closed the book, his jaw set. If the man's death had been to deliver this volume, then others would surely come seeking it. The Republic, he knew, had enemies both foreign and domestic. Secrets of this magnitude, if indeed they were what he suspected, could bring unrest, blackmail, or even insurrection. The lamplight sputtered as the oil ran low. Pinkerton leaned back, feeling the weight of history settle on his shoulders. He had been drawn into countless cases, train robberies, counterfeit rings, plots against the president himself. Yet this, he sensed, might prove greater still. He slipped the cipher book into his desk drawer, locking it with a small brass key. As he prepared to snuff out the lamp, he murmured to himself, "The man who died believed this mattered enough to give his life. I'll see it through, whatever it is." Outside, the wind rattled the panes again, as though whispering warning through the night. And so the case began. Chapter 2, An Intrusion in the Dark. The dawn after the Union Depot tragedy broke gray and uneasy over Chicago. Allan Pinkerton had spent the hours between night and morning poring over the cipher volume, his eyes burning from lamplight, his mind drawn into the labyrinth of signs and numbers. He was no stranger to sleepless nights, investigation often demanded them. Yet this night's vigil carried with it a peculiar intensity. Every mark upon the page whispered of hidden designs, of conspiracies still veiled. He traced them with a finger, noting repetitions, wondering whether they concealed names, dates, or instructions for treachery. By the time the bells of St. Patrick's tolled 7, Pinkerton rose stiffly from his chair. He opened the office blinds, letting in a sliver of cold winter light. His clerk William entered soon after, carrying a tray with coffee and bread. He stopped short when he saw the weary set of his employer's shoulders. "You haven't slept, sir." "No," Pinkerton admitted, sipping the strong brew. "And until I know what we face, I expect sleep will prove scarce." William glanced at the drawer where the cipher now rested under lock. His curiosity was plain, but he held his tongue. Pinkerton appreciated the restraint. The letter from the dying man had warned against trust, and although William was loyal, Pinkerton had survived too many betrayals to disregard such a warning. The day passed with his agents reporting back from Union Depot. They had questioned porters, newsboys, even the pie sellers on the platform. A consistent thread emerged: a tall man in a bowler hat had been seen brushing close to the victim. No one could recall his face clearly, he had that practiced air of those who vanish in crowds. Still, Pinkerton stored the image in his mind. A bowler hat. A knife in the crowd. A shadow slipping into fog. As evening drew on, the city outside fell into its usual tumult, streetcars rattling, vendors calling, the faint clang of the stockyards. Pinkerton closed the shutters and prepared to secure the cipher in his office safe. He was twisting the dial when he heard it, the faintest scrape against glass. Every sense sharpened. He crossed the room soundlessly, revolver drawn. With a swift motion, he pulled the curtain aside. The sash of the window had been raised an inch. A gloved hand, pale in the moonlight, groped at the latch. Pinkerton fired once, the report thunderous in the enclosed office. The hand vanished with a cry of pain. He darted forward, thrusting the window open, but the alley below was empty save for the echoes of running footsteps. Whoever it had been was skilled and swift. On the sill lay a small steel instrument, thin, curved, crafted for delicate work. A burglar's tool. Whoever had sent the intruder had known exactly what they sought. Pinkerton picked up the implement, turning it between his fingers, feeling the weight of confirmation. The cipher had enemies, and they would not shrink from murder or burglary to obtain it. He returned to his desk and considered. To keep the book in the office was folly. Already its existence was known to at least two parties, the dying man's killers and now this prowler. Yet carrying it on his person would invite danger at every turn. He chose a middle course. He placed the volume in a false-bottomed strongbox, disguising it among mundane ledgers of freight disputes. Few would suspect such drab company for such a dangerous prize. That night, with the office secured, he walked home along the river, revolver close at hand. The air smelled of damp timber and coal smoke. Shadows moved at the edges of lamplight, perhaps dock laborers, perhaps watchers. He quickened his pace, unwilling to give an assassin the chance. At home, his wife Joan regarded him with the knowing gaze of a woman long accustomed to danger trailing her husband's profession. "Another case, Allan?" she asked, handing him a plate of stew. "Yes," he answered shortly. He never burdened her with details. But the weight of the cipher pressed on him as he ate, the taste of broth dulled by thoughts of coded treason. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and filled with uneasy images, symbols dancing like fireflies, the gaunt man's blood spreading across the depot planks, a bowler hat disappearing into fog. He woke before dawn, his heart pounding. The following day, he resolved upon action. He summoned two of his most trusted operatives, Timothy Webster and Kate Warren. Both had proven their worth during the war, Webster with his calm nerve in hostile territory, Kate with her talent for disguise and eliciting confidences. "I cannot tell you all," Pinkerton said as they gathered in his office, "but I can tell you this much, a cipher of grave importance is in play. A man was murdered to keep it secret, and others will kill to claim it. I need the Union Depot combed again, quietly. Speak to those who were there, find the bowler-hatted man, learn who he is. Discretion above all." They accepted without hesitation. He trusted them more than most, yet even now he withheld the book's existence. The dying man's warning gnawed at him: trust no one. That evening, as he wrote his notes by lamplight, another message arrived, slipped under the office door. Its paper was coarse, the letters slanted. "Return what is not yours, or the streets will run red." Pinkerton read it slowly, then tore it in half. Fear was a weapon. He had seen it wielded by assassins and anarchists, by counterfeiters and train robbers. He would not bow to it now. But the message confirmed what instinct already told him: he was not dealing with petty thieves. This was organized, calculated, and ruthless. He placed the torn halves into the fire, watching the flames consume the threat. Then he sat back, listening to the silence of the office, broken only by the ticking clock. Somewhere in Chicago, the bowler-hatted man and his masters waited, certain that their quarry would soon falter. Allan Pinkerton allowed himself a thin smile. "We shall see," he murmured. For the first time, he felt the game truly begin. Chapter 3: The Codebreaker's Strain. The winter sky over Chicago that week remained heavy with clouds, as if the heavens themselves pressed down upon the city. Allan Pinkerton walked briskly along Michigan Avenue, his greatcoat buttoned to the throat, a small valise tucked under his arm. Inside it lay the Cipher book, concealed beneath sheets of mundane correspondence. He kept his hand tight upon the handle, though he knew it made him conspicuous. His destination was a modest townhouse near Dearborn, where a man lived who might, just might, possess the skill to unravel the symbols. Professor Wycliffe had once been a mathematician of high repute at Yale, but his eccentric manner and stubborn independence had cost him friends in the academic world. Pinkerton had met him years earlier during the war, when the professor's skill with codes had aided in intercepting Confederate messages. Now, retired from formal teaching, Wycliffe spent his days with puzzles, numbers, and the occasional glass too many. Pinkerton knocked sharply at the door. After a pause filled with shuffling sounds, it swung open to reveal Wycliffe in a frayed dressing gown, spectacles perched precariously on his nose. His eyes widened. "Pinkerton. By heaven, I thought you'd forgotten me." "I never forget a man who saved me from chasing shadows," Pinkerton said. He stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. "I have a matter of codes once more. And this time, the stakes may be higher than ever." The professor's study was a clutter of papers, maps, and volumes. A small fire burned, but the air was thick with pipe smoke. Pinkerton set the valise on the desk, drew out the Cipher book, and placed it before him. Wycliffe adjusted his spectacles, flipping pages with hands that trembled not from fear but from eagerness. His mutterings filled the room. Curious, irregular symbols, not a simple Caesar shift, numbers interlaced with pseudo-Greek characters, ingenious, ingenious. Pinkerton stood by the window, watching the street. He did not like to linger too long in one place with the cipher visible. Still, Wycliffe worked with an intensity that impressed him. The professor scribbled notes on scraps of paper, testing hypotheses, discarding them, then beginning again. Hours passed. At last Wycliffe leaned back, eyes shining with a mixture of triumph and fatigue. "This is no mere merchant's ledger. These characters conceal words of weight. See here, this grouping, when compared to my tables, resolves into something close to arsenal. And here, possibly senator. These are political references, Pinkerton. Political and military." Pinkerton's jaw tightened. So the dead man was no fantasist. The Republic may indeed be at risk. "More than risk," Wycliffe said. "This cipher could be a map of influence, a list of contacts, instructions for riot or insurrection. Whoever composed it has brilliance, but brilliance turned against stability." Pinkerton asked the question he dreaded. "How long to break it fully?" Wycliffe exhaled through his pipe. Days, perhaps weeks. The system is polyalphabetic, but with irregular keys. Not impossible, but taxing. His eyes, however, gleamed with excitement. A challenge worthy of my mind. Pinkerton left the book with him, though not without misgiving. Guard it well, Professor. Men have already killed to obtain it. If anything happens to you, Chicago may burn with the secrets it hides. As he departed into the cold night, Pinkerton could not shake the sense of being followed. Footsteps echoed behind him at irregular intervals. He lengthened his stride, turning suddenly down an alley. A shadow moved at the mouth of it, then withdrew. The bowler-hatted figure again? He could not be sure. The following morning brought confirmation that enemies were closing in. A rock shattered the window of his agency office, scattering glass across the floor. Wrapped around it was a note written in the same crude hand as before. Return the book. Your stubbornness will bleed the streets. Pinkerton pocketed the threat, saying nothing to William. He had no intention of fueling his clerk's worry. Instead, he dispatched his best agents, Webster, Warren, and George Bangs, to different quarters of the city. Search the taverns, the warehouses, the boarding houses near the river. I want whispers of a Colonel Radcliffe, a name from the war. A man with grievances, with money enough to hire knives. Find me proof. That night, Pinkerton returned to Wycliffe's study. The professor was pale, his hands ink-stained, but his desk littered with progress. Look, he exclaimed, thrusting papers forward. Repeated sequences here and here, clearly code for Chicago and St. Louis. Routes between them, perhaps rail lines or shipment points. And these, dates, I am convinced. They match timetables I recall from the Illinois Central. Pinkerton examined the symbols, his mind racing. Rail lines. Armories. Senators' names. It was no accident. This was not a cipher of idle fancy but a plan of deliberate sabotage. Careful, Wycliffe, he warned. You tread on ground that could cost you more than your wits. The professor only smiled thinly. A code is a war of minds, Pinkerton. I should rather die solving one than live in boredom. Pinkerton departed with the unease of a man who knows he has dragged another into peril. The fog that night clung to the gas lamps like shrouds. He tightened his coat and walked quickly, the revolver heavy in his pocket. At the agency, reports awaited him. Kate Warren had spoken with a dockhand who remembered crates being loaded onto a midnight train bound for St. Louis, crates overseen by men who paid with gold coin and offered no explanations. Timothy Webster had heard tavern whispers of a colonel recruiting discontented veterans, promising them wealth and purpose. Each piece fit too neatly. The cipher was their playbook, and Chicago was but one stage. If they succeeded, the Republic could be thrown into chaos. Pinkerton sat long into the night, piecing the fragments together, his pen scratching across his notebook. He thought of the gaunt man at Union Depot, dying with the satchel clutched in his hands. He thought of the bowler-hatted shadow, of the threats, of the rock shattering his window. The stakes were growing clearer by the day. This was not a case of mere theft or murder. It was a contest for the very soul of the Republic. Pinkerton leaned back at last, his eyes burning. He extinguished the lamp, letting the office fall into darkness. Outside, the city's clamor dulled to a low hum. Somewhere in that murk, his enemies moved unseen, convinced they had the advantage. He whispered into the shadows, as though Radcliffe himself might hear, "You've written your cipher, Colonel. Now I'll write its ending." Chapter 4, Pursuit on the Rails. The Illinois Central Station at midnight was a world unto itself. Smoke rolled along the high rafters like restless spirits, and the clang of iron wheels echoed as men in heavy coats loaded trunks and crates onto waiting cars. Allan Pinkerton stood at the edge of the platform, hat pulled low, his thick coat collar raised against the wind. To the casual eye he might have been any traveler awaiting a late-night departure. Only the revolver at his hip and the watchful glint in his eyes betrayed the truth. Word had reached him earlier that day from Kate Warren. Suspicious consignments, trunks too heavy for mere baggage, had been quietly slipped onto a southbound train bound for St. Louis. The handlers had used false papers, names that evaporated when traced. Pinkerton's instincts told him these shipments were tied to the Cipher, perhaps even pieces of the Colonel's plan brought into motion. If the code mapped riots, armories, and conspiracies, then the trains carried the means to enact them. As the locomotive shrieked and belched steam, Pinkerton boarded the last passenger car. Inside, kerosene lamps swayed with the motion, casting long, nervous shadows across rows of wooden benches. A handful of weary passengers dozed, their faces half hidden in scarves. Pinkerton sat near the rear, close enough to watch the baggage car door through the glass partition. He opened a newspaper, pretending to read, though his eyes never left that corridor. The train lurched forward, wheels clattering on the frozen tracks. The city lights dwindled behind them, swallowed by prairie darkness. Hours passed with only the steady rhythm of iron and the occasional murmur of a porter moving through the car. Midnight deepened into the small hours, and still Pinkerton waited. Then he saw them. Two men emerged from the adjoining car, pausing near the baggage compartment. They were rough-looking fellows, broad-shouldered, with the wary eyes of men accustomed to violence. One carried a satchel too heavy for a mere traveler, the other leaned against the door, scanning the corridor with forced nonchalance. They wore no insignia, no marks of respectable employment. Their attention to the trunk inside betrayed their interest. Pinkerton allowed them to pass, rising only when the corridor had emptied. He moved silently, the practiced gait of a man who had followed quarry through darker places than this. Reaching the baggage car, he pressed his ear to the door. Muffled voices carried through, punctuated by the creak of iron hinges. "Colonel won't forgive delay," one muttered. "Then we guard it till St. Louis." "No mistakes this time," the other answered. Pinkerton eased the door open and slipped inside. The baggage car smelled of oil and timber, dimly lit by a swaying lantern. Crates and trunks lined the walls, labels smudged, some deliberately obscured. At the center lay a massive trunk reinforced with iron bands. The two men stood over it, one fingering a knife, the other resting a hand on a revolver tucked into his belt. "Evening, gentlemen," Pinkerton said evenly, his own revolver drawn and steady. Both spun, startled but not cowed. The knife-bearer lunged forward, blade glinting. Pinkerton sidestepped, striking the man's wrist with the barrel of his revolver. The knife clattered to the floor. The second man fumbled for his weapon, but Pinkerton leveled his revolver at his chest. "Don't," he said flatly. For a tense moment, the men hesitated. Then, with grudging curses, they raised their hands. Pinkerton wasted no time. He bound them with a coil of rope found among the freight, tying their wrists and ankles securely. They glared at him, but their defiance could not mask the flicker of fear in their eyes. With the guard subdued, Pinkerton turned his attention to the trunk. The lock was sturdy but not impregnable. Using the knife now at his disposal, he pried it open. The lid creaked, revealing ledgers, maps, and stacks of paper marked with the same peculiar symbols as the Cipher volume. Duplicate sheets, carefully copied. Alongside them lay envelopes of cash and rolls of propaganda broadsides urging rebellion against federal authority. Pinkerton leafed through the maps. Rail lines were traced in red, arsenals marked with stars, and meeting places circled in bold ink. This was no mere fragment, it was evidence of a network, planned with precision. The colonel's hand was unmistakable. The bound men sneered. One spat on the floor. "You think this stops anything? You've only delayed us. The colonel will finish what we began." Pinkerton regarded him coolly. "Your colonel is a soldier without an army, a strategist chasing shadows. His cipher is nothing once broken." The man barked a laugh. "You've never seen him work." Pinkerton silenced them with a glance. He gathered the documents and closed the trunk, intending to turn it over to his agency office at dawn. Yet unease gnawed at him. The colonel had scattered his pieces widely. If one trunk carried such material, how many more might be rolling along other tracks, hidden among ordinary freight? As the train rattled on through the darkness, Pinkerton kept watch, revolver close, eyes sharp. He did not trust the silence. Conspirators seldom left matters to chance. When the train at last slowed for a small-town stop, he glanced out the window. On the platform, half concealed by steam, a tall figure in a bowler hat stood watching. Their eyes met across the distance. Recognition flashed between them, cold and certain. Then the man turned sharply and disappeared into the shadows, just as the train jolted forward again. Pinkerton sat back, jaw tight. The bowler-hatted man, an assassin, a courier, perhaps even Radcliffe himself, was still free. And if he watched the train, he knew what cargo it carried. By dawn, the prisoners had been turned over to local law officers at Springfield, their protests ignored. Pinkerton secured the trunk and sent word ahead to his Chicago office, instructing Wycliffe to prepare for new documents to assist his code-breaking. He stepped down from the platform, exhaustion pressing on him but resolve stronger still. The battle was far from won. The cipher was no longer a mystery of paper alone. It was living, moving, carried by men who would kill without hesitation. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Colonel Radcliffe wove his threads tighter, convinced that one day soon the Republic would unravel. Allan Pinkerton, however, intended to see those threads cut clean. Chapter 5, The Colonel's Shadow. The prisoners from the train sat in irons within a Springfield jail, silent as stones despite Pinkerton's attempts to pry loose their tongues. They gave only one name in defiance, and always with the same sneer, the Colonel. It was enough. Pinkerton had heard whispers of a former officer turned agitator, a man who drifted in the murk between soldier and outlaw, patriot and traitor. Colonel Radcliffe, sharp of mind, ruthless of hand, and consumed by a grudge against the nation he once served. Back in Chicago, Pinkerton stood in the smoky haze of his agency's main office, reviewing the trunk's contents. The maps and broadsides spread across his desk like a disease, each red mark a pulse of rebellion. Professor Wycliffe sat hunched over fresh cipher pages, muttering through equations and substitutions. "See here," Wycliffe said, stabbing a finger at his notes. "These entries are not mere names, they are titles. Positions of influence. Legislators, city councilmen, factory owners. The cipher outlines which men can be swayed, which bought, which blackmailed. It is a catalogue of corruption waiting to be activated." Pinkerton's mouth tightened. "And the Colonel holds the key." The professor puffed his pipe, eyes wild with the thrill of the chase. "Your Colonel is a strategist. He understands that chaos is not only forged with guns but with whispers. Topple a senator with scandal, delay a shipment of arms, incite a mob in the right quarter, and suddenly the whole fabric trembles. At that moment, Kate Warne entered, cloak dusted with snow, her eyes sharp as ever. "I've tracked rumors," she reported. "Radcliffe rents a house on the river docks under another name. Meetings at odd hours. Men arriving with trunks, leaving with purses of coin. Dockhands are tight-lipped, but money buys silence, and he has plenty." Pinkerton absorbed this silently. A house by the docks suited Radcliffe. From there he could watch shipments come and go, move contraband quietly, vanish into the river if needed. "I'll see it myself," Pinkerton said. But not alone. That night, Pinkerton walked the riverfront with two of his best men, George Bangs and Timothy Webster, keeping to the shadows cast by warehouses and coal heaps. The air was raw, carrying the tang of tar and damp timber. Rats scurried across planks, and the groan of moored barges carried in the dark. Ahead, a glow spilled from the shutters of a narrow house wedged between storage sheds. Laughter and the clink of glasses drifted out, muffled but clear. Through a crack in the shutters, Pinkerton glimpsed silhouettes, a half-dozen men around a table, one tall figure at the head. His bearing, erect and commanding even in shadow, betrayed military training. "That will be him," Webster whispered. Pinkerton motioned for silence. He studied the scene. Radcliffe's men leaned close as the tall figure unfolded papers. From their gestures, from the intensity with which they listened, it was clear orders were being given. Then, as if fate conspired to unmask him, Radcliffe rose and moved into the lamplight. His face, though aged by years, was unmistakable. A hawk-like nose, piercing eyes, a neatly trimmed mustache. Pinkerton recalled the wartime files. Colonel Adrian Radcliffe, a strategist lauded for daring maneuvers, later disgraced for insubordination. The man had vanished into obscurity. Now he re-emerged not in service of a flag, but in rebellion against it. Pinkerton's hand itched to storm the place, to end it there. But prudence reined him in. Too many armed men, too narrow an escape route. Better to observe, to draw the net tighter. Pinkerton absorbed this silently. A house by the docks suited Radcliffe. From there he could watch shipments come and go, move contraband quietly, vanish into the river if needed. "I'll see it myself," Pinkerton said. But not alone. That night, Pinkerton walked the riverfront with two of his best men, George Bangs and Timothy Webster, keeping to the shadows cast by warehouses and coal heaps. The air was raw, carrying the tang of tar and damp timber. Rats scurried across planks, and the groan of moored barges carried in the dark. Ahead, a glow spilled from the shutters of a narrow house wedged between storage sheds. Laughter and the clink of glasses drifted out, muffled but clear. Through a crack in the shutters, Pinkerton glimpsed silhouettes, a half-dozen men around a table, one tall figure at the head. His bearing, erect and commanding even in shadow, betrayed military training. "That will be him," Webster whispered. Pinkerton motioned for silence. He studied the scene. Radcliffe's men leaned close as the tall figure unfolded papers. From their gestures, from the intensity with which they listened, it was clear orders were being given. Then, as if fate conspired to unmask him, Radcliffe rose and moved into the lamplight. His face, though aged by years, was unmistakable. A hawk-like nose, piercing eyes, a neatly trimmed mustache. Pinkerton recalled the wartime files. Colonel Adrian Radcliffe, a strategist lauded for daring maneuvers, later disgraced for insubordination. The man had vanished into obscurity. Now he re-emerged not in service of a flag, but in rebellion against it. Pinkerton's hand itched to storm the place, to end it there. But prudence reined him in. Too many armed men, too narrow an escape route. Better to observe, to draw the net tighter. Chapter 6, Fire on the Docks. Chicago's riverfront after nightfall was a tangle of shadows and whispers. Coal smoke drifted low, mingling with the odor of tar, fish, and damp wood. Allan Pinkerton walked briskly along the planks with George Bangs and Timothy Webster at his side, each man wrapped in a heavy coat. Ahead loomed the narrow house Kate Warren had reported, a shabby structure wedged between warehouses, its windows aglow with lamplight. Within, Colonel Radcliffe and his followers plotted rebellion. Pinkerton had spent the day preparing. He met discreetly with city police to ensure reinforcements waited nearby, should things erupt. He instructed Wycliffe to continue his cipher work, warning him not to venture outdoors. And he had written a note to his wife, sealed and hidden in his desk, to be opened if he failed to return. Such precautions were the habit of a man long accustomed to walking into peril. Now, on the slick boards of the docks, he signaled to his operatives. They split, circling the house like wolves. From his vantage behind a stack of barrels, Pinkerton could see the silhouettes within. Radcliffe, tall and commanding, stood at the head of a table, his men leaning close as he traced plans upon a map. The rhythm of their gestures spoke of urgency. Pinkerton's intention was not to storm the place blindly but to corner its occupants, to force surrender before bloodshed. Yet fate seldom honored such tidy designs. A shout erupted suddenly, from one of Radcliffe's sentries posted outside. Intruders! The door burst open, and armed men poured forth, revolvers gleaming. Pinkerton and his operatives ducked as bullets tore through crates, splinters flying. The quiet dock was transformed into a battlefield. Back! Pinkerton barked. His men returned fire with measured shots, keeping low. The shriek of lead against iron filled the night. A lantern toppled in the confusion, spilling flame across the wooden planks. Fire caught swiftly, racing along tar-stained timbers. Within moments, smoke rolled upward, thick and acrid. From the doorway, Radcliffe himself appeared, his presence unmistakable even amid chaos. He carried a pistol in one hand, a leather satchel in the other. His voice carried above the din, "Hold them. I'll see this cargo safe." Pinkerton's eyes locked with his. For a breath, the world shrank to that narrow gaze, two men who had lived by strategy, now opposed. Then Radcliffe turned, striding into the smoke. Pinkerton charged forward, weaving through gunfire. He glimpsed Radcliffe sprinting toward a waiting skiff tied at the dock's end. The colonel leapt aboard as two accomplices shoved off, oars dipping into the black water. Pinkerton fired, but distance and smoke betrayed his aim. The boat slipped into the river, vanishing into the shroud of night. Behind him, the flames grew. Barrels ignited with dull explosions, casting showers of sparks. Pinkerton shouted for retreat. His men dragged one wounded officer to safety, coughing in the smoke. By the time city police arrived, the house was ablaze, its timbers collapsing with a roar. Any papers left within were reduced to ash. Pinkerton stood on the street, chest heaving, soot streaking his face. The glow of the burning dock painted the night in orange fury. Radcliffe had escaped, but not unscathed. In his haste, the colonel had left behind more than fire. Among the debris, Webster retrieved a scorched satchel discarded near the doorway. Inside were half-burned documents, brittle and singed. Pinkerton shielded them from sparks, examining what remained. Though many pages were lost, fragments survived, lists of names, numbers beside each, and references to city wards. Back at the agency, Wycliffe pored over the remnants like a man possessed. His spectacles glinted in the lamplight as he pieced together phrases. These numbers align with our cipher, yes, see how they repeat? This page was a key, Pinkerton. With it, I can at last unlock larger portions. And these names, recognize them? City alderman, factory foreman, even a newspaper editor. Radcliffe has threads everywhere. Pinkerton listened grimly. He means to stir unrest not with armies alone, but with influence. Turn the press, sway the factories, bribe the council. When riots break, the city's own leaders will hesitate to act. Wycliffe nodded, his hands trembling with excitement and dread. Give me 2 days with this, and I'll tear the cipher open. 2 days felt like eternity. Pinkerton doubled his patrols, sending men to watch depots, taverns, and boarding houses. He warned federal contacts quietly, careful not to spread panic. Yet tension simmered. Newspapers already printed rumors of unrest, of secret societies arming in the shadows. On the second evening, Kate Warren slipped into the office with news. Radcliffe's face is known now. A dockhand recognized him boarding a steamer bound south 2 nights past. But he disembarked before Joliet, disappearing into the countryside. He is a ghost, sir. Pinkerton rubbed his brow. Ghost or not, Radcliffe left traces. The cipher, once broken, would expose his network. But until then, every hour was danger. That night, as Pinkerton walked home, he passed groups of men gathered on corners, their voices heated. Talk of unfair wages, of corrupt officials, of revolution whispered from lip to lip. Perhaps Radcliffe had seeded these embers, perhaps not. But Pinkerton knew a skilled agitator could fan such discontent into fire. When he reached his home, Joan looked up from her sewing, her face etched with worry. Another blaze tonight, Allan? She asked softly. Yes, he admitted, removing his coat. But not one I could extinguish. He sat heavily, staring into the hearth. The dock fire still burned in his mind, the smoke, the gunfire, Radcliffe's mocking salute as he vanished. The colonel was not merely plotting, he was acting, moving with purpose. Pinkerton clenched his fists. The cipher fragments in Wycliffe's hands were their one advantage. Once cracked, the veil would lift, and Radcliffe's shadow would lose its cover. Until then, every step was pursuit through smoke. As midnight struck, Pinkerton returned to his desk, opening his journal to record the night's events. His handwriting was steady, though fatigue pressed on him. He wrote one line with deliberate emphasis. Radcliffe plays with fire, but I will see that he burns in it. When he reached his home, Joan looked up from her sewing, her face etched with worry. Another blaze tonight, Allan? She asked softly. Yes, he admitted, removing his coat. But not one I could extinguish. He sat heavily, staring into the hearth. The dock fire still burned in his mind, the smoke, the gunfire, Radcliffe's mocking salute as he vanished. The colonel was not merely plotting, he was acting, moving with purpose. Pinkerton clenched his fists. The cipher fragments in Wycliffe's hands were their one advantage. Once cracked, the veil would lift, and Radcliffe's shadow would lose its cover. Until then, every step was pursuit through smoke. As midnight struck, Pinkerton returned to his desk, opening his journal to record the night's events. His handwriting was steady, though fatigue pressed on him. He wrote one line with deliberate emphasis. Radcliffe plays with fire, but I will see that he burns in it. Pinkerton absorbed this, every instinct sharpening. And the goal? To shatter confidence in government, Wycliffe answered. Factories halt, rails burn, militia armories fall into rebel hands. By the time order is restored, Radcliffe stands ready with his own men, hailed as savior. Pinkerton felt the weight of it. He had seen cities panic before, fires, strikes, mobs, but never a scheme so deliberate, so orchestrated. Radcliffe meant not only to disturb, but to unseat the very order of the Republic. Have you proof of names? Pinkerton asked. Wycliffe hesitated, then turned another page. Here, the code reveals lists. City councilmen marked with symbols denoting loyalty or weakness. A senator from Missouri. A newspaperman here in Chicago who prints editorials sympathetic to radicals. Radcliffe's cipher is not merely instructions, it is a ledger of corruption. Pinkerton's jaw hardened. Then we hold a weapon equal to his. Expose these names, and his foundation crumbles. Wycliffe leaned back, trembling from fatigue. The work has cost me, Allan. But the cipher is broken enough. The rest is application. You must move swiftly. Pinkerton clasped his shoulder. You've done the Republic a service greater than any soldier on a field. Rest now. Leave the danger to me. Back at the agency, Pinkerton gathered his operatives. Kate Warren stood with arms folded, her expression sharp as glass. Webster and Bangs leaned forward, listening intently. Pinkerton laid the deciphered sheets before them. This is Radcliffe's plan, riots timed with precision, armories targeted, rail depots seized. He intends to bring half the Midwest under panic before the month is out. We must not merely stop one riot, we must strangle the scheme at its birth. Kate's eyes narrowed as she scanned the names. Some of these men are respected, sir. Expose them wrongly and we hand Radcliffe a victory. Which is why, Pinkerton replied, we act with evidence in hand. We watch, we record, we intercept. When the moment comes, there will be no doubt. The operatives nodded. The room filled with the quiet gravity of shared purpose. Over the following nights, Pinkerton's men fanned across the city. Webster lingered in taverns where discontent brewed, listening to whispers of free rifles and promised pay. Bangs traced shipments of crates disguised as farm tools, their true contents bullets and powder. Kate donned the guise of a seamstress, slipping into meetings where women passed pamphlets calling for uprising. Each returned with threads that, when woven together, revealed the tapestry of conspiracy. Crates bound for warehouses, agitators primed to march, money distributed from shadowed hands. And behind each whisper lay Radcliffe's unseen influence. One evening, as Pinkerton sat in his office reviewing their reports, a messenger burst in, breathless. He held a torn scrap of cipher paper, hastily delivered by a contact near Joliet. Pinkerton read it and felt his pulse quicken. See Springfield Armory on the 15th. Colonel present. So the time had come. Radcliffe himself would lead the strike. Pinkerton summoned his team. We have our chance, he said. The colonel shows his hand. He rides for Springfield within days. We'll be there first, and when he strikes, he'll find himself ensnared. That night, as he prepared his revolver and packed his travel bag, Pinkerton paused by the window of his home. Snowflakes drifted in the lamplight, soft and deceptive. Inside, his wife Joan stitched quietly, glancing up with worry. You're chasing him again, she said gently. Yes, he admitted. And you'll catch him? Pinkerton's gaze hardened. I must. If not, the Republic itself falters. She nodded, not pressing further, but her eyes followed him long after he turned away. By dawn, Pinkerton and his men were on the road south, sleigh runners cutting through snow. The countryside stretched silent and cold, but in Pinkerton's mind, the Cipher's words echoed: march, seize, riot. He knew the colonel would not rest until his vision of chaos was attempted. Yet now, the cipher was broken, the dates uncovered, the names unmasked. For the first time since the dying man pressed the satchel into his hands at Union Depot, Pinkerton felt the tide shift. The colonel's shadow was still long, but its shape had been revealed. As Springfield's rooftops appeared in the distance, Pinkerton tightened his grip on the reins. The final contest loomed, and he intended to be ready. Chapter 8: The Final Confrontation. The chill of February clung to Springfield like a stubborn shadow. Allan Pinkerton and his operatives arrived under cover of dusk, their sleigh crunching across hard snow. The State Armory loomed ahead, a stout brick building on the edge of town, its windows glowing faintly from oil lamps within. Guards in blue coats paced the yard, stamping their boots to keep warm. To the casual eye, the place seemed quiet, secure. But Pinkerton knew better. Colonel Radcliffe's cipher had spoken plainly: seize Springfield Armory on the 15th. Colonel present. Pinkerton requested a discreet meeting with Captain Miles, the officer in charge of the garrison. Inside a cramped office smelling of coal smoke, he spread the deciphered sheets across a table. Miles, a broad-shouldered veteran with a scar running from temple to jaw, studied them grimly. "Rebellion in my yard," Miles muttered. "And led by one of our own. God help us." "No time for prayers, Captain," Pinkerton replied. "We must prepare. Radcliffe will expect a skeleton guard. Instead, you will double your watch, keep your men concealed. When they come, we close the trap." Plans were set with military precision. Pinkerton placed Webster and Bangs near the outer wall to intercept lookouts. Kate Warren, disguised as a laundress, slipped among the town folk to observe for suspicious movements. Pinkerton himself would remain within the armory, revolver at his side, waiting for the moment when shadow gave way to action. The night of the 15th descended heavy and silent. Snow drifted under the pale moon, muffling sound. From his post by a narrow window, Pinkerton watched the street. Hours stretched like taut wire. Midnight passed. Then, movement. Dark figures approached, their shapes hunched against the cold. More followed, dozens of them, spilling from alleys and barns, converging upon the armory like wolves circling a sheepfold. At their head strode Colonel Radcliffe, unmistakable even cloaked. He moved with soldierly bearing, his hand raised to signal silence. Pinkerton's pulse quickened. Here was the man who had haunted the case from the beginning, the shadow behind the cipher. Now, in the flesh, he led his men toward treason. Radcliffe halted at the gate. A whispered command, and two men slipped forward with crowbars. They jammed them against the iron lock, straining. The screech of metal echoed faintly. "Now," Pinkerton said. At once, the yard blazed with lamplight. Guards burst from concealment, rifles leveled. Webster and Bangs appeared at the flank, revolvers drawn. Kate Warren signaled from the street, townsfolk scattering in alarm. For a heartbeat, the rebels froze, startled prey caught in lantern glare. Then Radcliffe's voice cut the night like a whip. "Forward! Seize it!" Gunfire erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the snow, men shouted, horses screamed. Bullets pinged against stone. Pinkerton crouched by the window, firing steadily, each shot measured. Two rebels dropped, their weapons clattering. Radcliffe surged ahead, pistol blazing, rallying his men with reckless courage. He seemed a figure carved from defiance, unwilling to yield even as the trap closed. His followers faltered under the disciplined volleys of Miles's soldiers, yet he pressed on, as if the Republic itself depended on his charge. Pinkerton left the window, stepping into the yard amid smoke and cries. He advanced steadily, revolver raised, eyes fixed on the colonel. "Radcliffe," he bellowed above the din, "it ends tonight." The colonel wheeled, his face stark in the lamplight, fierce eyes, mustache bristling, the air of a man consumed by his own destiny. He leveled his pistol. "You mistake me, Pinkerton," he called. "It begins tonight. A weak nation must be broken before it can be reforged." He fired. The shot tore past Pinkerton's ear, hot and close. Pinkerton returned fire, the report deafening. Radcliffe staggered, his pistol slipping from his grip, yet he remained upright, clutching his side with bloodied hand. Still he tried to rally his men. "For the Republic, strike," he gasped. But their will had broken. Surrounded, outnumbered, they threw down weapons, dropping to their knees in the snow. Guards rushed in, binding wrists, shoving prisoners toward the armory wall. Pinkerton advanced slowly. Radcliffe sank to one knee, breath ragged. Blood stained the snow at his feet. He looked up with a twisted smile. "You think you've saved her," he rasped. "But the Republic is fragile. Men like me will rise again." Pinkerton's gaze was steady, his revolver still trained. "Perhaps. But tonight, your cipher is broken. Your men are captured. And you, Colonel, will face justice." Radcliffe's strength failed him. He toppled sideways into the drift, the snow swallowing him. Guards seized his body, carrying him into the armory, but his eyes had already glazed. The mastermind of rebellion would answer only to eternity. By dawn, the yard lay littered with broken weapons and scattered papers. Smoke drifted from spent lanterns. Prisoners huddled in chains, silent now. The cipher pages, once instruments of treachery, rested in Pinkerton's satchel as evidence for federal authorities. Captain Miles clasped his hand. "You've spared us calamity. Springfield owes you a debt, as does the nation." Pinkerton shook his head. "I did my duty, as any man ought. The Republic was threatened, she must always be guarded." Later, on the road back to Chicago, Pinkerton rode in weary silence. Snow gleamed in the morning sun, pure and deceptive, as though no treachery had ever stained the land. Yet in his mind he carried the memory of the colonel's defiant cry, the conviction that weakness must be purged with fire. It was a creed he had heard before, and would likely hear again. At his office, Pinkerton found Wycliffe asleep at his desk, spectacles askew. He let the man rest, placing the satchel gently upon the table. The cipher, broken and neutralized, would be turned over to Washington. But its lesson remained with him. Vigilance was not a single battle won, but a lifelong war against shadows. That evening, as he sat with Joan before their hearth, he spoke little. She asked if the danger had passed. "For now," he said. "But there will always be men like Radcliffe, clever, ambitious, ruthless. They believe the Republic is theirs to reshape. My task is to remind them it belongs to the people." She reached for his hand, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment of rest. Outside, snow fell softly, covering the tracks of rebellion. The cipher's symbols no longer whispered threats. They were ashes now, and with them, the colonel's dream of chaos. And Allan Pinkerton, weary yet resolute, prepared himself for whatever shadows might rise next.